So today we move into the content, and before we get into church history, I want to spend some time talking about some of the backgrounds. I think it's important for us to understand the backgrounds of Christianity as far as what culture was like as Christianity came into existence for a variety of reasons. We talked on Tuesday about the importance of context in understanding history. But also, I think that, I try to shy away from providentialist history in the sense of saying, well, this is necessarily from God when it's not clear. And so I tend to kind of be very careful. But I think when we look at some of the backgrounds of Christianity, I think there are some things that occurred in those 3-4 centuries leading up to the life of Jesus that do seem to be providential, do seem to, in hindsight, be preparing the stage for Jesus' arrival. Now, remember, over the course of these centuries we're looking at, we're going to be breaking it down into different components, looking at the politics, what kind of situations were going on politically, especially related to Christianity. So we won't look at, our focus is a survey of church history. We'll be talking about doctrine, practice, geographic spread, and culture and society. And so these four or five categories that we'll be looking at are meant to help us kind of pull some things together from Gonzalez, but also kind of get us to think very thematically about how Christianity is not just relegated to the church building, that Christianity is not just about beliefs, and it's not just about what Christians do as far as things like singing and praying, but often has a strong influence, or has had a strong influence on civilization, specifically Western civilization, and that's a part of church history as well. As we begin looking at politics here in these centuries before Christianity, I want to start with the Greeks and thinking about the influence that Greeks had on the Near East, Europe, those regions that were very important for Christianity. Not everything, obviously, politically in Greece. So even though when Jesus is born, the Roman Empire is on the scene, right? That's the power. And so much of early Christianity is shaped under the Roman Empire. We have to recognize there's some things that go on in Greece that are very important as well before the Romans come into power. And specifically, a lot of that has to do with some things way back, 4 centuries almost, before Christianity, and the things that Alexander the Great had brought about. Now, essentially what we're talking about is often referred to as Hellenism. The idea of the spread of Greek culture and ways of life. Now, one of the things that becomes a part of this area that we're talking about, with the conquest of Alexander, who got as far as Persia, what's modern-day Iraq, modern-day Iran, was that with Greek culture and Greek power being spread throughout this region, Greeks tended to move about as well. And so they traveled to other places outside of Greece. With that, right, so you have all these Greek people moving around, it helps the Greek culture, Greek language, Greek customs spread to these regions much more rapidly than other forms of cultural spread would have taken place. Right? When you think about how much Western culture today is present in a wide variety of places. Some of that has been influenced by American presence in various places militarily, but some of it is just as Hollywood movies get sent overseas. People watch them, pick things up from them. Well, having control of a region like the Greeks did allows Greek culture to spread more rapidly. Additionally, the Greeks helped bring about a one-world economy, which is kind of ironic given the situation we've been in for the past 7 years about how influential the Greeks have been over the Great Recession, and then currently there's a lot of things going on in Greece about whether they're going to stay with the European Union and whether they're going to, all sorts of other things economically going on in Greece right now. So this further ties the people in this region together when you're kind of dependent on and tied to one culture, one power. Greek language also spread with the culture, with the people. With that were Greek ideas, Greek thinking about a variety of things. Ideas that were often accepted by a lot of the peoples that were living under Greek power. Not only did Greek ideas shape these regions, there was an increase in levels of education as well. Additionally, Greek religion also spread through the realm. Greek deities, Greek practices. Many people in a lot of these places also turned to Greek philosophy. But thinking of the philosophy of eventually people like Plato, Aristotle, and others, philosophy often became a representative way of life for people. So you have the religion of Greece, you have the philosophy of Greece, you have urbanization, where people are gathered into cities instead of being scattered throughout the country. And then finally, with the spread of Greece, you have an increase in individualism. These are things pointed out by Everett Ferguson in his book, Backgrounds to Early Christianity. Now, since our focus is survey church history, what kind of influence would these things, why would these be important for us to talk about and to recognize in the context of church history? How are these important?
Well, the church, I think, is affected by a lot of these things when you think about economics. Even in today's world, I guess economics would, play a little more of a factor when you think about preachers getting paid, per se, or just ministers in general. But then again, language, not only do you have one language or a common language, you have multiple languages that people need to be heard. And then accepting philosophy. Philosophy is a way of life. When that to me is people were so centered then around a government. Okay, here's how we live. We have, this, we do this and this. We don't live by a moral principle. And so I think that affected at least the way people thought and the way they worshipped at least.
Yeah, I want to highlight some of those because I think that you hit some of the really important ones. The spread of Greek language. Now, according to the book of Acts, the apostles and others were able to speak in other languages that they had never learned or studied. Yet what is the New Testament written in? Greek. Right? It's specifically Koine Greek, a Greek that had spread throughout Right? This area and was also kept alive with the Roman Empire. And so you're able to write these letters. Paul's able to write a letter. Peter's able to write a letter. And it can go to a variety of churches, and there are going to be people there who are able to read it because it's in a language that everybody understands. Now, philosophy, Hinton pointed out the importance of ethics and morality, especially in Christianity. But one of the things that we don't recognize is how big a shift this is reflecting. What were the Greek deities like? The Greek gods and goddesses? Yeah, I mean, they often reflected the worst of human nature, right? They were in battle with each other. They would sleep with human beings and have half human, half divine children, right? Demigods. Right? The Greek gods were not who you looked to in order to decide how you would live an ethical life. They weren't there for ethics. And so it was philosophy that a lot of Greek citizens turned to discover, how do I live the good life? How do I know what is true, what is beautiful? How do I decide how to live? Now, why would that be important for Christianity? That there's this distinction between religion, which is about the gods and sacrifices, and philosophy, which is about how to live. What are some of the things that Christianity would have been new? That those two things would have related to? When you think about Greek deities, what message does Christianity have about that?
There's only God.
All right, there's one God. These gods are false, right? So you have this message of, you're countering the religious views of the day, but people are already starting to think in this kind of way in which they're not too sure about the deities anyway, because the deities just simply act like glorified human beings. And so Christianity, for a lot of people, was able to address this deficiency, so to speak, in Greek religion. After Alexander's death, of course, Greek culture continued to spread. His empire was broken up among 4 of his generals. But not everyone was always satisfied with Greek control. And often the subsequent leaders of these regions, right? So as the generals died, their children took over, et cetera, on down the line. Often many of those leaders wanted to have more control. And in the 2nd century BC, this is largely what happened with the rulers of Syria that were based in Syria. A man named Antiochus IV. He was a Seleucid ruler after Alexander's general Seleucus was the one that had gotten control of Syria and those regions. His nickname was Epiphanes, which means God manifest. Right, so that's already kind of a rather high view of who this individual is. And under the Seleucids, Hellenism continued to spread. Specifically, it spread throughout Judea, so that a lot of Jews adopted Greek clothing, began exercising in gymnasia. In those gymnasia, which were primarily open to men, you would exercise naked. So some Jews even went through, supposedly, from some of the records of the time, went through a process of uncircumcision. so that they would not obviously be Jews in the presence of Greeks, Gentiles. I'll let you figure out how that one works. Anyway, so by the first third of the 2nd century, we're talking the 170s into the 160s, there are a lot of Jews that are disturbed not only by this Greek control of Judea, Palestine, they're also disturbed by the number of Jews that have adopted this Greek culture, these Greek practices. And it all comes to a head around the year 167. Antiochus decides he wants to take over Egypt. And so he plunders the temple in Jerusalem, right? Takes all the gold, precious metals, in order to finance his expedition to Egypt to take control. But Rome has interest in Egypt, even though Rome's not a major power at this time, and actually defeats Antiochus. Rumors spread that Antiochus has died. And so there is a group of Jews in Judea who think now is the time to revolt, since government's going to be in chaos, the leaders died. We'll overthrow the Greeks and have freedom. Well, of course, Antiochus is not dead, and so on his way back, he breaks down the walls of Jerusalem, deploys a garrison of soldiers in there, and then forbids certain aspects of the Jewish religion. Copies of the scriptures were destroyed. Any festival, including the Sabbath, was outlawed. Food laws and circumcision were prohibited. And at the height of this indignity, Antiochus has an altar built on the altar of burnt offering and a pig offered on it, essentially desecrating the altar. This, of course, does not sit well with many Jews, but especially a family known as the Hasmoneans. The head of the Hasmoneans was a man named Matthias, who was a priest. Several situations arise that lead to this. One of which is Greek officials try to force Matthias to offer a sacrifice to the Greek gods, and he ends up killing them. His son Judah decides to lead a guerrilla war against the Greeks. They are eventually referred to as the Maccabees, hence the Maccabean revolt. So Hasmonean is their family name, but Maccabee is a nickname. Some believe that it probably means something like the hammer. And so this idea of being a hammer of God. Antiochus withdraws the ban on Jewish religion in 164. The altar is reconsecrated. The temple is cleaned out. It is this event, the cleansing of the temple, that is remembered in the festival of Hanukkah. And so if you've ever wondered what Hanukkah was about, it's about the Maccabean revolt and the cleansing of the temple. Eventually, Jews gain their independence around 142. And in this period of independence, the Hasmoneans have a lot of authority, both religiously, the priestly family, as well as secularly. And so a lot of governmental officials of Judea at the time are from the Hasmonean family. This will be the last independent state of Israel, Judea, until 1947. But